there we are. Good, we got some coming in. Welcome everybody. Several of our folks, Megan Pike, morning Megan, Tyler Phillips and others. We can't all be together, but at least we can join virtual spaces and feel connected with one another. Well, Mike has already done one of these today, and so he is warmed up, ready to go. He's firing on all cylinders and is ready to bring the A game this morning. But Dr. Stroope, welcome. Thank you for joining us today.
It's good to be with you. Yeah.
Well, a little background to this for those that are joining, as we have a few more joining in. We're still figuring out in pandemic. We've adjusted a lot of what we've done through the Truett Church Network, and I reached out to Dr. Stroope back in early January, maybe even December, about, hey, let's have another conversation. Let's talk. And many of you have reached out and said, while you appreciate some of the other outside voices, outside of Truett, authors, experts, other people we've had in, that you really value hearing from our professors as well. And so really, this was a lot of Dr. Stroope's idea and conversation of what would it look like to just ask, as we're all parsing division in society, deep differences of opinions and beliefs within our families and our friends group and our churches. What would it look to just talk about either life hacks or how we kind of navigate faithfulness currently, and then also just in our history, in our ministry history? And so we're all asking these questions, how do we be both prophetic and pastoral in our ministries and not burn relationships as much as possible in doing so? How do we hold just the edges of our churches and families and groups together without fracturing down the middle? How do we remain hopeful and not allow sort of cynicism to just creep into our souls and just in many, many other things that I think a lot of us are asking? And so this is what we want to do in this series of Navigating Faithfulness, is just share some stories about how others have navigated this along the way. Not that they're experts or have it all figured out, but that have trod down similar roads and we can all learn from and discuss this together. So Mike, again, thank you for joining us and being with us, and I look forward to the conversation. So given that little preface, I'll just ask, can you tell us of a season or a time when navigating faithfulness, using that term, was really a struggle for you?
Yeah. Well, let me preface. Thanks, Matt, for doing this and for having me. Let me first preface that, as you said, I'm not an expert, and I have failed at faithfulness, and maybe we learn best from our failures. And so, yeah, I just need to say that up front, that I'm not coming as the one who is so faithful, has it all together. And so I acknowledge that. And also to say that this is maybe one man's story, and it's not every man's or woman's story. And that we all navigate this differently because our personalities, because of our situations, and what life pitches at us is different. I think about my own life, and I've really had it good in terms of my health, in terms of how the things have fallen together. And yet I know some people that, boy, it has not been that. And so I take no, I'm not prescribing my story for other people. And then probably also I need to say that I don't think I'm saying anything new here. And maybe it's just a matter of what we know and what we maybe need to rehearse aloud, and just say that this is what faithfulness is. You prepped me with this first question, and I thought back through, what have been the events in my life, and what have been the times when I've had to navigate what it meant to be faithful. And I've gone through some stuff. I've gone through the death of a very dear friend, and this was devastating. I've had a very close friend walk away from the faith, and that was just so hard. And then I basically was fired from a job that I was in for a long time. And I can paint my departure from the International Mission Board in a pretty way, but it was a hard ordeal. And then we went through a war in Sri Lanka, and just trying to do right by my friends there as well as by my family, but yet also stay engaged in ministry. And so, I could rehearse all of those and kind of talk about what I did. But as I thought about the question, it's really faithfulness in the small things that led up to those things that maybe produces faithfulness. And so my point is, I think that it's with the small that we're able to meet the big, which says to me, Mike Stroope, if you're not faithful in the small things, then you're going to strike out swinging in the big things. I won't be ready for those big things. And as I look back on, leaving the IMB and the death of a friend and the war we went through, if there was anything that gave me stability in the midst of that, was the fact that there were some practices in my life and there was some history of trying to be faithful to my promises and to my spouse and to my friends that made the difference when I went through the deep waters. And so, I don't think you can really measure the man or the woman by how well they go through a war or the death of a friend, as much as you can say, here's how they're living in the small things and how they're caring for the small things, and that will be an indicator of how well they'll do in the big things, in the hard things. And so in a way, I think we're practicing faithfulness so that we're prepped and ready for when those things that will come in our life, because they will come. And it's not just that we're doing it for that. Yeah, we're practicing in the small ways because those are important, whether it's tending to an ailing spouse or tending to a relationship that's gone awry, or being faithful to tell the truth. Those small things have a mounting effect. And so, if at my ripe old age, at 69, I would say that's the lesson I've learned. And if we want to be prepared, if we want to be faithful, when it really does matter, then we've got to be faithful when maybe it doesn't, we think, matter.
Well, and we're not here to, no, that's great. And we're not here to plug Truett Seminary, but that certainly falls in with the ethos of how we are seeking to form, and how many of us have been formed, about spiritual formation, caring for your soul, self-care, these things that, which is essentially to say we're forming a culture of integrity and faithfulness every day, all day, that then show themselves. Matt Snowden, your pastor, one of your pastors, was on several months ago and talked a lot about culture eating strategy for breakfast. And that's not exactly what we're talking about, but that idea of, and I just read Scott McKnight's Culture of Tove, about forming a culture of goodness in everything that we do, that exudes all the way out, sort of in peacetime and conflict, all the way through. But I appreciate that.
The way I've thought about it, Matt, is that it's about being whole. And I'm building wholeness to my life, that I'm not just a worker bee, and I'm not just a preaching man, and I'm just not just a teacher. But if I can build a wholeness, and with wholeness then comes integrity. Integrity, which means that all the pieces fit together. And if there's any malady in our world this day, is fragmentation. That I'm one way with this person, I'm one way with this person, I'm this at the office, I'm this at home, and there's not a wholeness. I think the biggest thing, the biggest compliment that can be said of Matt and of Mike, of anybody else, of Andrew Bowles, is that he is who he is, no matter where he is. There's wholeness. And I think that comes by that we are not faithful when we're on the stage talking, or when we're writing a book, or when we're in the classroom, but what people see of Mike is Mike. There's wholeness to his being. And that then allows me not to shatter, not to come apart, not to fragment when really the pressure comes. And so I think about it almost like a ball that has to be put together and held together, and the glue there holds it together when the pressure comes. And that's integrity. That's wholeness.
So if I can get personal a bit, what would you be willing to share some of your temptations, perhaps, that threaten your wholeness? That threaten to and that might lead you towards celebrity? Because Mike we all look up to you. You know, it would be easy to get a big head about that, even in Truett's world, you know. Yeah, would you be, and what practices or relationships or people have kept that at bay, kept that fragmentation at bay and helped keeping you whole?
Well, I mean, there's several things there. I think one is that I don't lie to myself. We can lie to we can be self-deceptive. It doesn't mean that I beat myself down, but I have a realistic look. I mean, I know that my calling card says sinner saved by grace. And I know that I can sin today. And I know that I can do something terrible to destroy my marriage, to destroy relationships, destroy someone's character. I'm on the precipice of that all the time. And so I think not to live paralyzed in fear, but to have a healthy understanding that I am a man fallen and I've been redeemed by God's grace. And therefore, I live in that. And so, so just to tell the truth, to be honest. And then I think to realize that posturing and self-promotion is deadly. And I mean, the thing I fear, I mean, to be personal, the thing I fear more than anything else as a man is obscurity. Mm. And I grew up a people pleaser, and I want people to be happy, and I want people to think well of Mike. And that's toxic, in that I then will live for that and make that my aim. And therefore I tell lies to myself, and I exaggerate to other people, and I'll even flatter people in order to get them to like me. And that's not wholeness. That's not truth. And so if I can live with others with that kind of self-awareness, then that, to me, that cultivates faithfulness in those relationships. And so if I do something against you, Matt, I need to come to you and say, this is humiliating, to say I was wrong, and that what I said was a lie, or what I said was an exaggeration, and therefore I need to confess that to you, and I need to confess it to God, and I need to pray. I do pray every day. I have my time in the morning, and the three things I pray for are the pride of life, the lust of the flesh, and the lust of the eyes. Mm. All three of those are there, and the one for me is this pride of life. More than anything else is self-righteousness and self-promotion, and wanting to be on the stage and to be known. And so to say that aloud, well, it's the one, to say it to God and to say it to myself, but then also to have a friend who knows that I understand that, and they can maybe even question me about that. To me, that's healthy. So to me, that's a practice that I realize who I am, and that that I have failed.
Yeah.
And that failure is in my resume, and that by the grace of God, I've overcome that, or I've gone past that, but it's there. To me, that creates wholeness. The enemy of wholeness is notoriety and the stage, success, wanting too many trophies, and that I walk humbly. 2 mornings ago, I was reading the story of Paul and Ananias. And over here we have Ananias, and it says that he was a faithful man, and he was praying, and God spoke to him. And yet the rest of the book is about Paul. I think, what is this about? Well, Ananias had a role, and he played his role, and under the grace of God, of course, he may have done other things, but he did this. He went in a brave way to Straight Street and found Paul and anointed his eyes and all that. So realize that I am not the dean of the school. I am not some great preacher. I'm not these things. And to say, this is who I am, and this is what God has given me. Can I be faithful to that right there in front of me? And to me, that's wholeness. And that then produces faithfulness, maybe in things that I don't expect that come my way. Just confessing my sin and realizing that I'm a sinner saved by grace, and that I maybe have a role, but it's not Yeah, a part of lusting, the lust of the eyes is that I see someone else and their role, and I lust after it, and I neglect what's in front of me. And I want to be elsewhere. And I want to be somebody else. And so I get distracted from that little girl in front of me or that student in front of me, and I'm looking beyond, and then that fragments my being to where I'm not faithful.
Doing placement at Truett for well, the past 6 years on and off, though Jack Bodenhammer does most of that now, I still get a lot of the calls. And it's amazing how many times you get a call from a pastor, student minister, any role in ministry, about looking into moving, right? They want to explore that conversation. And when you kind of drill down on why, sometimes there's some really good spirit-filled reasons. Sometimes there's conflict, but much of the time, maybe not most, but close to it, there's a friend doing better in ministry, and maybe getting paid more, maybe it's not even real. It's just kind of in their mind. And there's this feeling that we're not where we should be, or need to be a little higher up, a little further along. And I've certainly felt that in my own self very often.
I've been there.
Yeah, that is just that. It's that. That lie of comparison. And once we play the game, there's no getting off it. Because if you're the dean of Truett, great, but you're not the president of Baylor, right? You're not whatever it is. There's always another plateau, another thing that's there.
And it's not just about envying someone else's place. It fractures us.
Yeah.
It distracts us from that which is in front of me. And
it takes away from our faithfulness to the place God has us here and now with this particular people, with their particular warts, that we're called to love and be a part of. My story of ministry is not of one of, and we took plenty of criticism. We went through a bunch of people leaving, and it was not easy. But really, the struggle for me was finding people that would really speak truthfully about who I was and how I was doing and my limitations and the mistakes I had made. More people saying, great sermon, you're doing a great, that I knew there was critics, and I knew how to handle those over time. But really finding people just to speak normal truth to you about your growing edges, about, things like that, was really, really difficult. And I think for many ministers, to find the truth external from ourselves is really, really a difficult thing, and therefore incumbent on us to develop processes and good friends that help us lead us into that. Well, as you think of some of those situations you mentioned, and again, you can pick from any of these or just more generally, how did the struggle to remain faithful, hopeful, persevering, how did that change you for the next stage? Do you look back kind of on a series of those and see yourself change negatively, positively, differently? How did it shape you?
Well, I think our decisions in the middle of those things make a difference. I think we all rise. We're meant to rise, and then we crash to the ground, and then we rise again, and we crash again. And that's life. Let's be honest, that's life.
Yeah.
And so it's, what do we do with that? Do we become bitter? Do we learn how to forgive ourselves and others? And do we take that as learning? I think failure and suffering and disappointment, being misunderstood, those are two-edged gifts. They can cut you up, or boy, they can build empathy and character and resilience and hope. And I don't know that empathy comes any other way, but by being disappointed and forgiving. And hope, hope is just a word and a concept unless it's tried. Hope untried is not hope. And so I think the path is that we have to say that this is a part of life, the rising and the falling, the crashing. And then secondly, do we have the resources and the friends, and do we have the accumulated history that helps us to curate what's going on with us, and then to move into the next stage, realizing that this can serve a greater purpose. I'm sure those who have lost have empathy more so than any of us, the rest of us. And the loss of a good friend teaches us that. And you don't read that in a book or get that in a classroom.
Yeah.
You have to walk through it. And so those are things that are hard won, and yet they're necessary. And that doesn't mean being Pollyannish about it. I think it means really taking stock and walking through faithfully through it, and finding resource and God and friends in the midst of walking through it, and realizing that we rise to maybe a different, not a higher, but a different place as we come through it. And that creates then sort of the accumulative effect of faithfulness and empathy and growth and maturity that allows us to be really good ministers.
And doesn't that cause us to, we have a lot of young ministers watching, just looking through the names, of reevaluating all of our metrics of success, because if to become a long-term, persevering, over 40 years of ministry or more, faithful leader, it necessitates being forged in the fire. You know, Todd Bolsinger has a great book out. He and Todd visited about it a few weeks ago, Tempered Resilience. And the whole theory of that book is, he uses a couple metaphors, one from Martin Luther King, of the task of the leader is to hew hope out of the stone of despair. And then that we're forged in this blacksmith fire. And that's the only way to develop the character that continue hewing at the stone of despair over decades, is to be formed in this fire, like much of what you said. And it does reshape the difficulties we go through. Not that being reshaped is the purpose for them, but there is a redemptive aspect of this. Only when we've screwed up a few things in ministry and had to make up for it, and had to apologize, had to repent, had to practice confession, only when we've worked through some of that, faced true disappointment and faced true grief, those are the things that form us for our long-term longevity of thriving in ministry. But boy, yeah, it paints everything in a whole different light.
Well, I look at leadership and I think, do I want to follow power and technique, or do I want to follow this person who has been shaped? I mean, I'm following a person, not these gimmicks, and not these power plays, and not the technique of manipulating me or whatever, but I'm following a person. And because I trust the person, and I trust what's happened in the person. Well, that's something you don't buy. That's something that you live. And it's something that's developed in you, and that God creates in you.
Well, this is along those same lines, but I mean, how have you kept cynicism at bay? Mike, you're a hopeful guy, right? And you're also eyes open to the world, and you're not hopeful by denying. I was supposed to preach at Calvary this weekend. My family's come down with COVID, and so we're in quarantine. I had to cancel, but it was going to be the 6th week on hope, and I really started the sermons preparing it saying, I'm sick of talking about hope. And then the thought came, maybe when we're sick of talking about hope is really when we're getting to the meat of what it means to hope. I mean, what does it mean to choose hope naively, you know, to some degree, in spite of all the evidence to the contrary, to choose hope over and over again. And the biblical pictures of that are just everywhere when you look at it, of people that continue to hope in spite of all contrary evidence. How have you continued to hope over all of this you've been through in your ministry and life?
Yeah. Well, in part, we're playing the long game, not the short game. And so we have to walk this out. And of course, as you know, I'm an avid walker, and I think it's become a part of my life because it's almost like you've got to be in a rhythm, and trust the rhythm, and not the circumstances, not the weather, not the road, but trust the rhythm of the walk. And so we're in that rhythm, and the rhythm carries you. You get tired, you get disappointed, but the rhythm carries you. And so, and back again to the small things. If we in those rhythms in the small things, and then when the things really try to take us down and we lose heart, we're in the rhythm. And a part of the rhythm for me, Matt, is just confessing, even when I don't believe it, just confessing that He is God and that I am man, and that I can count often his his good gifts to me. And that becomes rhythm. And the rhythm of life then carries me. When I'm sick, or when I'm disappointed, or when I feel like I'm entitled, that rhythm is what keeps me going. And so I'm playing the long game, but I'm playing it step by step by step by step. And so that's the way I've beaten down cynicism. And boy, it's at the door knocking, to where I want to curse somebody, or I want to curse life, or even maybe God. It's being in the rhythm that I'm walking this out, and I can look back and see all this walking, and I can look forward with hope that there's a destination for me. And so, yeah, it's the walking, it's a step by step, and realizing that step by step we get to another place. That's the point.
Yeah.
That we'll keep walking, we'll be in another place. And so, and for me, a part of it is just confessing, I'm mad, or I'm disappointed, or I'm undone. Help me. Or why did I say that? What was I thinking? And to live on the edge of that cynicism and that disappointment, but also to live toward, stepping toward maybe the next belief, and the next word of gratitude, knowing that I'm going someplace else. So in a sense, what I'm saying is that hope is always out there. It's not here. It's always out there, and I'm moving toward it. And that makes life fragile. It makes it kind of dicey, but I think we're just men, and we're finding our way as we walk forward.
Boy, yeah. That will change the way I walk in the evenings. I mean, it's what a great picture. I mean, we're literally stepping down cynicism. We're stepping down, disconsolation. We're stepping on these things and choosing this again. And
Well, people ask me, Mike, why do you walk so fast and so with such purpose? And that's a part of it. I'm not sauntering, and I'm not strolling. I'm walking.
and if you've never walked with Mike Stroope, I spent a couple weeks in Hong Kong with him, and he will walk you to death. He can outwalk anybody on this call. I don't care who you are. It's impressive. And God, isn't it? Do you still find yourself amazed? And this is what I was thinking while you're talking. I mean, that God, the Spirit of God, can continue to pierce your soul.
Oh, yeah.
And continue to break through even you and me in this. And that's where the hope resides, right? I mean, that's what keeps you coming. It is the walk, but it's the fact that God pierces that on the walk, really.
And our confession allows that. Yeah, He can pierce all He wants, but we can resist it.
Yeah.
And we can be angry, and we can push Him away. But the fact that we confess, I don't know. Confess, I'm undone. And so we open the door for Him then to pierce us with this power, this hope, and this new life and reconciliation, all the things that He does in our lives. Yeah.
Well, and confession is that ultimately countercultural tool or practice of just nothing in politics, nothing in watching church, or really church scandals or celebrity culture. It's all about try to keep this away, or try to be defensive, or explain away, but just coming to that point of confession. There's no movement of the Spirit, I don't think. There's no revival. There's no true change without that. And we all have need. I've developed over the last year or so one pastor friend that I practice confession with. It's not all the time. It's not even regular. But more than anybody else, when I really have something I need to confess, I can call him and practice that, and have experienced that in just a few really powerful ways of something that, perhaps is a way to bring the edges together. If our edges or wherever those edges may be, right? In church and life and family, can come back to a renewal of that practice that seems very hopeful to me.
Yeah, and to that point, Matt, it may be that these days we have too many friends.
Ooh, ooh, yeah, yeah.
A friend in ministry who's in New Mexico, I was visiting him one time, and he had across his little scroll on his screensaver, more time with fewer people.
Man, that's convicting.
Well,
Yeah.
meaning that we can be friendly with so many people, but yet really not have anybody know us.
Mm.
And as you're saying, in terms of confession, in terms of walking alongside someone, I mean, that's expensive. That's dangerous. That's being vulnerable. And most of us, we don't want that because we're fragmented and we don't want people to know how undone we are.
And ministry, or particularly congregational ministry, feeds that. I mean,
Oh,
it can't, particularly right now when we can't sit down over lunch and have a deep conversation. We're limited to, and we can still foster deep interaction right now. We just have to work harder at it. But it definitely lends itself toward a lot of medium friendships that don't pierce that other level that goes down, and really where our true self is exposed, and that's dangerous.
yeah, it is. Oh, we can hide, and we can hide the sin, and we can posture and pretend. And so, I mean, a lot of our social media allows that as well. So yeah, so just sitting across from somebody and looking them in the eye, and them looking you in the eye, and having a conversation, I think that nurtures faithfulness and teaches us the rhythm of faithfulness.
Has any of this shifted the way you're teaching students, knowing that you're forming them for ministry of various stripes over the past few years? Are you asking different questions, or offering different tools to them to prepare for this world?
Well, now I'm one that believes in questions and asking questions, and love to pose questions. But I think of late, more and more, I mean, questions are good and they're key, but I'm more and more trying to confess
Mm.
to my students, to let them know where I've driven my stakes down. They need to hear that, and the reason that is, I think more and more students know what the questions are. They're living with the questions. The questions are bowling them over.
Mm.
And it's not that I have to teach them what the questions are. I think by and large, they're coming and they know that, I mean, this is a mess, and they know where the messes are. And so at some point, I've come to the conviction that I need to drive my stake down and say, this is where I stand, and this is what's important, or this is where I will die, and this other stuff I'll let go. And make that kind of confession, in that I'm not saying you have to be like me or you have to take this on, but you need to know that for this man, I've driven a stake down here, and it's made this kind of difference for me. That's one shift I think I've taken of late,
Yeah.
is just to really make my confession. And a part of my morning prayer is, Lord, I'm making my confession today. Let it fall on ears that need to hear it. It's not for everybody. Maybe if I have 30 students or even 12 students, it's not for everybody, but there's somebody there that maybe needs to hear that. And if the Spirit has prompted that, then it's for maybe that person or those two people. And I need to trust that, and to realize that part of my faithfulness is to make that confession aloud if the Spirit prompts it. Doesn't mean I do it every day. It doesn't mean that I don't raise the questions, but more and more I'm feeling the need to really confess and drive stakes down, so that people know that, at least for this man, this is what he has decided on this issue or on this important topic, and just making my confession. Yeah.
Mike, that's so good. I appreciate you sharing your time with us. This whole conversation reminds me, and it's a different conversation than I was expecting in some, which is wonderful when that happens. so many, when we have big problems, most of us as ministers, I'll speak at least for me, we want to fix it. I mean, I'm thinking about how do we fix, how do we heal, how do we get better at this? But leadership development and spiritual formation, which are not synonymous completely, but obviously close related, at the end of the day is really ultimately about managing ourself and caring for ourself and developing our character and our relationship with Christ and in our confirmation to Christ likeness. And that's really where this not ends, but it certainly begins, and almost where it ends. We can only control that. And ultimately that shapes everything else around us. When I do think a lot of us are caught up in what do we say? What do we not say? You know, how do we push? How do we not push too far? When ultimately it is, how do we allow Christ to flourish within us and shape us? And what practices, relationships do we need to help that happen? And that's certainly my takeaway and my challenge from this. And I appreciate it. As we come to an end, you have any final thoughts, words of encouragement you want to offer?
Well, there's a lot of things we're called to ministry, called to preach. We're gifted for this, we're gifted for that. But I think the bottom line is that we're to love, no matter what the issue is, no matter what side of the table we're on. And to me, to be faithful means that I always hold that up as number one. And yeah, I have a role maybe to say something or to correct, but more than anything, I had better love. And so I think at the very heart of faithfulness is the question, am I loving well? Not pretend people, but the people that God has given me that's right in front of me. And am I a lover of those that God has given me, whether I'm on a trip with them or they're in the classroom or we're sitting over at Penland? What am I doing to love well those in front of me? So yeah, that's the last word.
That is an excellent last word. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your witness to me and to many others. The last year, we've had our best conversations on a webinar with other people watching. I look forward to grabbing lunch when we can visit, perhaps with not everybody watching. But man, I do appreciate it, and thank you. Thank you for everyone who tuned in, that's watching, that will listen to this on podcast. We're grateful for you. I hope you're encouraged by this, and blessings on your ministry. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.